The World Boxing Council and the World Boxing Association had long dominated the world of boxing. Ridiculous sanctioning fees, questionable fighter rankings, and selective rule enforcement were just a few of the reasons others had grown tired of the death grip held by the Big Two. The 1977 Ring magazine scandal born from Don King's United States tournament served to increase the influence of the Big Two by forcing the networks to go with their rankings over that of the more grounded Ring magazine rankings. Now, whether this was deliberate on King's part is up for debate, but it certainly helped strengthen his grip on the sport. I'll cover this specific event in a video, and I'll link it in the description of this video when it's posted down the line. In 1976, the USBA, a regional body akin to the NABF, was formed to provide a base for boxing in the United States. The USBA was, originally, a springboard toward WBA rankings for fighters on the come-up. In 1983, the members of the body voted to expand internationally, led by Robert W. Lee Sr., who had failed to secure the presidency of the WBA. The organization was called the United States Boxing Association International, or USBA-I, before being renamed to the International Boxing Federation, or IBF, in 1984. The IBF sought to grant greater opportunity to both fighters and promoters on the come-up. It recognized already established fighters as its champions, however, in its bid to gain legitimacy. In 1983, Marvelous Marvin Hagler couldn't come to an agreement with the WBC and WBA over his title defense and instead fought for the then USBA-I title. This got the ball rolling big. Larry Holmes, upon refusing to defend the WBC title against Greg Page, became the IBF's path to full-scale legitimacy when he was made their champion. He would defend the title successfully up until he was outpointed by Michael Spinks in 1985, the proven best light heavyweight of the decade, who would bring further merit to the title. The World Boxing Organization, which would form in 1988, went about its origin in a slightly different manner. It came about over rule disputes at a WBA convention. In an effort to gain early recognition, the WBA sanctioned a super middleweight title bout in which Thomas Hearns would emerge its inaugural champion. It did not appoint already established champions to be its title holders. If it had of, in the case of undisputed champion Mike Tyson in 1988, it may have found itself legit from the go. Instead, it sanctioned a fight between rather unknown heavyweights, of which Francesco Damiani would emerge as the inaugural champion. This may have initially doomed the WBO, as despite the array of champs that held their titles, they struggled to find recognition as a fourth sanctioning body until more than a decade after their inception. Perhaps complicating the journey of the new bodies further was the omnipresence of Don King and his influence within the WBC and the WBA. With Don King's domination also came the rise of rival promoters like Bob Arum. King and Arum in particular have been involved in a series of scandals revolving around their alleged influence within the sanctioning bodies. King's fighters have notoriously been granted the most opportunity while those otherwise are shut out. Remember when the WBC stripped Leon Spinks because he chose to rematch Muhammad Ali as opposed to facing Don King fighter Ken Norton? And how the vacant strap would be contested between Norton and likewise Don King fighter Larry Holmes? Remember how the WBC shafted Lennox Lewis in 1996 for the recently returned Mike Tyson? How about when the WBA stripped George Foreman in 1995 for refusing his so-called mandatory and Don King fighter Tony Tucker, who hadn't fought a ranked contender in years? Foreman made it clear he had no intentions in dealing with King. Tucker would fight for the vacant title against likewise Don King fighter Bruce Seldon, who would go on to have the embarrassing showcase against the recently returned Mike Tyson, who himself was bumped up the rankings as a Don King fighter. Arum's corruption boils down to the payoffs, of which I won't dive into in this video at least. His 40-plus year rivalry with Don King may have began when he stole Muhammad Ali from him. Speaking of said rivalry, King's quest for revenge is what unfolded through the ravaging of the heavyweight division. If you weren't fighting for and under the rule of Don King, you would forever be in division obscurity. King's rule over the division became too much even for the puppet master himself in 1986, when he grew tired of the splintered and torn heavyweight scene. Now, not only were the sanctioning bodies constantly at war, so were the promoters. This mosh pit of complications ensured the death of the dream match era, as money, politics, and corporate interest became boxing's main priorities over fan interests. Add to that the growing list of corruption from each sanctioning body, old and new. Bribes, new belts, and new weight divisions, all at the dismay of the sport. This is, sadly, still reality today. And what of the prospect of unification? Well, it's common knowledge that unification is dreaded by the bodies, probably because of the financial loss that naturally comes with it. In the 90s, WBC champs weren't even allowed to unify with WBO champs. That's as blatant as it gets. Well, at least it's dreaded until the moneymaker deems it okay. When Don King recognized the fledgling interest in the sport due to the shenanigans of the time, he approached HBO with the proposition of unifying the three titles. More on that event in episode 6.